Hi everyone, it's Lauren and this is my October reading wrap-up video, so all of the book reviews for the books that I read last month. I didn't get a whole ton of reading done in October just because I had so much stuff going on like every weekend in my personal life, but I did manage to read 5 books, which isn't loads for me. I think that's a lot for some people. I always feel weird on BookTube when people go, oh, I haven't read that much, I only read 10 or something. But it's okay, it's quite an interesting mix of books that I've got here, so let's dive straight in. The first one that I finished was Elmet by Fiona Mosley. Now the reason that I read this is that it was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize this year, and also I'd heard a lot of hype and interest about it from friends and from people whose opinions I trusted. And to be honest, the plot or the story probably wouldn't have attracted me to this book on its own if I hadn't had all of those other opinions. So this is from the perspective of a young boy called Daniel who lives in Yorkshire with his daddy and his older sister Kathy, and they live in a house that they have built in some seemingly abandoned or unused woodland, and they are essentially trying to escape from society. But the broader story is about the battle between the kind of lower working class community around there against the privileged upper class landlords. But it is more of a tale of that working class underworld and the world of illegal fights and gambling and using kind of enforcers and hard men to get the job done for you. So it's quite interesting. It's not at all what I expected, especially from like the cover. I thought it was going to be a little bit more mystical than that. What I did really enjoy about this book is the prose, because Fiona Mosley's writing really makes you slow down. I am one of those people who is 100% guilty of sometimes skimming through books or just reading so quickly just because I want to know what's happening in the story, and her writing style really makes you pause and slow down and take in what she's trying to say. So I found that very interesting. Downsides for me probably was the pacing. Like at the end, I felt like the plot and everything that was happening just almost exploded far too quickly, in my opinion, and almost to the realms of unreality. Although I kind of see what she's doing with it, I'm not sure how successful it was. I can't be more specific than that, obviously, because I'll give away the plot. But this is her first book. This is a debut novel, and with all of that considered, I think this is a really interesting and exciting new talent. So I'm really pleased that I read it, even though it wasn't like my favourite book ever. I'm pleased to have picked it up and to have been introduced to her writing. Next, a little book that I wanted to just briefly mention, and that is Little Black Book by Otiga Ogbagba, and this is a toolkit for working women, it says on the front, and I absolutely raced through this. This isn't the kind of book that you are going to read in one sitting, really, I realised once I started reading it, and it's very much more just tips. And there's chapters here on building your brand, on networking, overcoming creative blocks, public speaking, and there's tips from Otiga herself, and then also quotes from other kind of successful creative people. And although I don't work in a kind of creative freelance industry myself, I obviously do the YouTube stuff on the side, so this was quite interesting for me, and I think it's the kind of book that, yeah, although it's not one big long continuous read, there is so much in here that I think I'm going to be flicking through it and going back to it when I want to have a bit of a kick up the bum career-wise perhaps, which to be honest I think we all need. I don't think anyone is ever going, I know exactly what I'm doing and I know exactly what path I need to take to get there. So if you're ever thinking about you need a bit of oomph in your career, or you're wondering how to do something properly, I think this is probably a really good resource. I then read The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin, which is a collection of essays, well 2 essays really, and these were sent to me by Penguin to celebrate Black History Month, which in the UK is in October. So these 2 essays, the first one is a letter from James Baldwin to his nephew, and the other one is a much longer form essay about the nature of religion and identity within kind of the African American community. And I really enjoyed these. I've not read any Baldwin before, and I think although I'm obviously a novice to his writing, I do feel like this was quite a good introduction for me. I found it really easy to get on board with all of the things he was talking about. I especially really enjoyed the second essay, where it really looks at, like, it kind of combines his own autobiographical experiences of his father being a preacher and him going into preaching himself when he was a teenager, and then a wider examination of religion and what it is and who is it for, and how Black people, especially African American people who are descendants of slaves in the US, how they see themselves within the Bible and whether Christianity is for them or whether Islam is for them. And it kind of looks at all of these different views on this subject, and I'm making it sound very academic and very wide-ranging, but it's also very accessible. So I was really impressed with this. A really nice first dip into James Baldwin's writing, and yeah, look forward to reading a bit more of him. Then, a bit of a depart from my normal reading, I read some historical fiction, which I don't normally do, but this book was a pick for my book club that I have with my friends, and my friend Mary really loves historical fiction, so she recommended it, and that is An Innocent Traitor by Alison Weir. This book is about Lady Jane Grey. So if you don't know, Lady Jane Grey was Queen of England for a total of 9 days in between the reigns of Edward VI and Mary Tudor. This book follows Jane's entire life from her birth and her upbringing up until the point where she is made queen and eventually executed. And it's not the best written book. I don't think I would recommend it on its literary merits. Each chapter is from a different person's perspective, and it's almost like they're writing in a diary. It's not fantastic writing in and of itself, but Alison Weir is a historian, and what is so interesting, and what I think this book is more about for her, is the taking a look at things that actually did happen, and so much of this book is based in fact. A surprisingly small amount, I think, has been made up by Alison Weir, and it's more about her trying to work out these different characters' motivations and see into their psyches a little bit. We begin at the end of the reign of Henry VIII and his final wife, Catherine Parr. We go through all of Edward VI's reign, and it's so interesting because when you look back at history, the way things unfolded just seems inevitable, and it's really interesting going back to that time and realising that it wasn't clear at all who was going to reign after Edward VI, and no one knew that he was going to die young, and it's very Game of Thronesy in terms of its intrigue and the political manoeuvrings of everybody around there, and just how important it was whether someone was Protestant or whether they were Catholic, and that's really kind of life-threatening which side of that you're on. So yeah, I really enjoyed learning about the time period, and I would recommend it if you're interested in the Tudors or learning about English history if you're not from the UK. And I read it very, very quickly. It was very easy to read, but don't read it if you want some kind of like really poetic metaphors or something, because that's not really in there. And finally, for October, I read The Good People by Hannah Kent. So Hannah Kent is the author of Burial Rites, which I think was her first book, and that came out a few years ago and had so much hype when it came out. I haven't read Burial Rites, but when this came out, I thought, well, I've got to get on that Hannah Kent bandwagon. Burial Rites is about the last woman to be executed in Iceland, and Hannah Kent has taken that real life situation as inspiration for her book, and this is very, very similar. This takes inspiration from a case where a wise woman was trying to cure a young boy who they described as a changeling in Ireland in the 19th century, I believe, and so she has kind of taken that and then worked this history around that real life case. So within this story we have Nora, whose daughter has died. She's been left with her grandson, who is described as a cripple, and then her husband dies, so she's left alone to care for this young boy. There is also Nance, the local wise woman, who is said to talk to the fairies, the good people. People go to her for cures, and it's about her trying to work out what's going on with her grandson, trying to get Nance to cure him. But that's really, although that's the plot, that almost doesn't seem to be the point of this book. And what's quite interesting is it's very much an ensemble piece. It's about everybody in that village. And I would say this book, what it is really doing is looking at the concept of mob mentality and mass hysteria and like a blame culture, really, especially when steeped in so much superstition, and kind of the superstition and belief in fairies and the good people combined with belief in religion and God and the devil is just so much a part of these characters' lives. You cannot escape it. It's every hour of every day. Everything that they do is ritualized. And although you're looking in at this society from the outside and from a modern perspective, it's really interesting how quickly you realize that it's not that big a leap of faith for Nora to start believing that her grandson is a fairy. It's everywhere. These beliefs are part of who these people are, and it doesn't seem that beyond the realms of reality. And it does kind of play with you a little bit, because you're sort of thinking, is this real? Like, I can't really tell. Are we in a fantastical society, or are we looking at reality and science? And it's very interesting. So that's it for this video. As always, I would love to hear from you if you've read any of these books, whether you agree with me, disagree with me, have some other thoughts, and what have you been reading in October? Like, kind of what good recommendations do you have? What have you been loving? Like, talk to me, let me know some things, because otherwise it's just like me speaking to my wall and not having a conversation. But I hope you're all well, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.